virtual program on disruptive technologies for very busy professional women on the run. The topic of discussion today is implementation of digital strategies. As you're all well aware, business growth largely depends on sound strategy, strong objectives, and innovative technologies in order to stay ahead of the game in this competitive world of revenue growth and margin improvement. Recent improvement and development in disruptive technologies brings about the need in digital transformation of organizations. The transformation that brings massive benefits to organizations and businesses. However, it also brings new challenges and risks. Today, I'm honored and delighted to introduce you to our guest speaker, Pradeep Aradhya.
Hi.
Who will be gently guiding us through the steps of digital strategy implementation while addressing those risks and challenges.
Sure.
Pradeep is the Chief Executive Officer of Novus Laurus. He brings a unique perspective on business growth by combining his expertise in technology, media, and culture towards sustained revenue growth. Pradeep advises and guides digital transformation initiatives at Fortune 500 companies such as LI Bank, Disney, Staples, Lowe's, Manpower, Bayer, Pharma, and Sirius Radio. As a member of National Association of Corporate Directors, Pradeep works extensively for organizations in education and cultural spaces, such as Sasaki Foundation, the New England Museum Association, and the Starbucks Women Impact Network. Pradeep, welcome to TBC Talks.
Thank you. Happy to be here at TBC.
I wanted to start our discussion with this disruptive technology definition, and I wanted to learn from you, what does it mean to you?
Sure. So most any new technology in the time that it is born is usually disruptive in some way. When the weaving mills were born, when the steam engine was born, it was disruptive. In today's age, probably the things that pop to mind are artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, things like the blockchain, cryptocurrencies, even small things like APIs that connect various authoritative repositories together could also be considered disruptive. Typically, what happens with disruptive technologies is that there's a mad scramble for what they can do, but adopting them takes a lot of time and careful thought and planning. So while some companies try to do that, other companies get ahead, get an advantage, and as first movers, they reap that benefit. So disruptive technologies are important to everyone because they set customer expectations. The customers that you're servicing expect to sort of have certain things available and facilities available to them. If you don't provide that which your competitors have, then you've been disrupted.
Fantastic. Just wanted to mention to you that our members are executive women and board members, and many of them, they lead the course of organization growth. Do you have any suggestions for them on how to address or how to recognize the need in digital transformation around these rapid changes that's happening currently?
Sure. So typically, technology, particularly disruptive ones, are utilized on two sides of the business, on the customer-facing side and on the internal side. On the customer-facing side, you're really driven by what the market is demanding of you. If customers see a certain experience or a certain availability of data or other things from your competitors, they're going to expect the same from you. And if you do not have it, they think you're outmoded. On the internal side, scaling operations is really, really important, and that includes everything from providing, access that is carefully controlled to the availability of various kinds of data for quick decisioning, to an ability to sort of speed up your operations and make them a little bit more agile. So all of these things are really important towards making sure that the company that you're leading or guiding is up to par. Most organizations typically have, the larger ones have a technology debt, if you understand that term. which is basically that their technology infrastructure is probably about 10 years old.
Outdated, yeah.
Yes, very outdated. And if the backbone, the core technologies that you use are quite that old, then adopting some of these newer technologies becomes virtually impossible. So it's really important to, one, make sure that your core backbone infrastructure is not in technology debt, but you have something current, and then you have an ability to bring in these newer technologies and utilize them in a way that makes your customers as well as your internal constituents.
So the assessment of the current status of the technology platform within the company is very important.
Correct.
As a first step.
Correct.
Wonderful. Speaking of roles and responsibilities of the executives and the board members during the digital transformation, what would you say is the role of the board members during transformation?
Sure. So it depends on the particular company where the line falls between executives versus board members. So the first thing that we were talking about is what the digital transformation responsibilities actually are, and then we can maybe say a little bit about what the board in particular should do. So typically, if you're setting up for digital transformation, you want to have a clear sight about three kinds of things. There are factors that you need in order to be able to set up digital transformation. There are factors that you need to take care of while doing it or in the process of executing it. And then there's factors that you have to be careful about for the future that I'm going to call sustaining factors. In regards to the planning factors, it's typically if you're not speaking the language of revenue, margin, and shareholder value, then you're not doing yourself a service. So the biggest thing that you have to be able to do is to set the stage by saying this digital transformation or these technologies will indeed stimulate these revenues and margins and things like that. So start at the business level, define those things as the objectives, and then bring the technology in. That's the first factor. The second factor, which is really important, is that there are a lot of departments. They all speak different languages. There is turf war. So digital transformation is huge. They are literally career killers because of how important and complex they are. So the right thing to do is to make sure that the leadership defines the goals, defines the alignment, make sure that everybody understands just how important this is, and also creates a culture of collective entrepreneurship.
I think that's important.
Yes. If an executive or even someone lower down is worried about their job for making a mistake, well, they're not going to do anything. They're just going to sit on their hands and watch other people do stuff, and that will not help you get to digital transformation. So you have to be able to say, making mistakes is okay in some manner. You don't want them to be silly, but you definitely want them to, be able to take a reasonable risk and be forgiven.
Within the range of policies and regulations of the company.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. It's also super important there to make sure that the roles and responsibilities of the different departments are carefully defined so that there's not a turf war to say, okay, we want this first, or this is more important. So those are the two factors that you need during the planning stage. During the executional stage, I think the most important thing probably is the build versus buy question. If there's, every company has some sort of idiot savant, either on the technical side or on the business side, who has a pet project, who thinks it'll solve everything. Right? So if you're not a software company, but somebody's saying we'll build the software, that's probably a silly thing. There are vendors in almost every space that have, version 10 level software that is very mature. And if you're trying to build that from scratch and keep up and make all the enhancements as you go along, you simply are fighting a losing battle. So don't do that. Buy the software in such a case, unless you're a software company.
Take a note on that. That's very important.
There are also business folks who think that a certain revenue mechanism or a certain feature or whatever it is going to be the panacea for everything. I had one client who basically put several 100,000 SKUs online because they thought online was the thing to do. When they finally got done, they found that only about 15,000, not several 100,000, of those SKUs actually made any money for them. So that was a colossally wasted effort, and you really need to be able to sort of go back and say, this is where the money is, these are the things that are important, and analyze that before you make the money and take the steps.
So basically what you're saying is that the executive team will have to perform the analysis of the company, in order to build a strong strategy, digital
Correct.
strategy,
Correct.
and consider all angles of the business and performance, including human resources,
Absolutely.
and thinking about who to bring in as new skills and
Correct.
talents who will help the transition.
Yes, and that's one of the second that's the second most important factor during execution, which is change management.
Yes.
So every one of us probably knows someone who's still hanging on to a flip phone, and some of us have probably even given them a nice smartphone. And despite the fact that the smartphone and the touch interface is quite so intuitive, these people have trouble. So change management and making sure that all the people who are supposed to use this new digital technologies that you bring in are comfortable with it, committed to using it, and actually use it successfully is very important. And if you don't sort of create a way for that change management to be done, digital transformation efforts will kind of die. The third side of it is sustenance, right? In the factors that are required to sustain digital transformation, probably the most important thing is containing churn. Both in regards to technology as well as executives and personnel. What typically happens is you go through a cycle of trying to transform, and then you have a change in management, you have a change of executives, new people come in, and they don't think that what you've built so far is going to work, so they advocate a complete turnaround. They advocate throwing away that thing and building it from scratch. This is a colossal waste of time and money. And what you should do is when you bring in new executives, you should say, this has been built. We cannot afford to just throw this away. We need to be able to utilize the backbone, maybe not the specifics, but at least the backbone of what's been built, and plan for when the backbone itself needs to perhaps be changed out later on. But every little thing that is advocated as changeable does not need to be changed. What you really need to be able to do is to utilize the capex that's been already been done and continue based on that. So that's one part of sustaining it. The last part of sustaining it is something called future-proofing.
What is that?
So the first time, did you ever buy, when was the first time you bought a large screen TV?
Oh, that was a long time ago, probably more than 10, 15 years ago.
Correct.
Yeah, and the technology moved on
Correct.
since that time. So
Correct.
now the screens are thinner and bigger and curved and
Exactly. So I remember the first large screen TV that I bought was a whopping 42 inches. It was about this thick around, and I paid somewhere around $2,500. Today, in the market, I can buy a 65-inch, high
definition,
ultra high definition smart TV, which I can tell to show me certain programs.
Yeah.
They're about this thin, and they are sub $1,000. So technology moves very, very fast, as also customer expectations. So in order to future-proof your digital transformation, the first thing that you have to admit to yourself is this is not a once and done.
Yeah.
This is continual. You have to, number one, put in a backbone that you can support future technologies with. Number two, as these new technologies come in and redefine how business is done, you have to be able to adopt them and clearly use them very quickly. So this is very important, and this is future-proofing.
That's fantastic. So much information. We definitely will need to take this into account and talk about this more. But now, among this all complexity of things that needs to be done, and new risks and challenges that you just talked about, there is also something that executives will have to think about when they make a decision towards the transition. So are there any signs that they can look for in order for them to make a decision? Yes, it's time for us to go digital.
Sure. So the nature of disruption is probably defined by two factors.
Mm-hmm.
One, whatever is being offered by your competitors is either easier, faster, or cheaper.
Right.
And
it's a competition, so we basically going back to business question.
Correct.
Yeah.
The second factor is that the way that your competitors start to actually treat their customers.
Mm-hmm.
So really interesting digital companies are able to understand the context of the customer and every step along the customer life cycle. When they're aware of the product, all the way down to when they buy it and when they have to become loyal.
Can you interrupt you here?
Sure.
My question would come from, again, comparing how it was done before and how it's done now. So from my understanding, previously company were trying to understand the market and doing market research by running a huge amount of surveys, and they were sending out those questionnaires, and they were getting probably less than 10% return. And based on this little kind of feedback that they're getting from the huge population of customers, they're trying to make the changes or improvements in their product or services. So now I understand with the big data and artificial intelligence and all potential digital forces and tools, I believe there are other ways to collect that information.
Sure, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. In today's world where almost everything is being tracked in some way or the other, an individual's data is their karma. What they've done is visible to some extent or the other to everybody who wants to buy it. This means that your intent, your context is somewhat available. How you utilize that to service that customer is a matter of ethics as well as a matter of capability. So for example, at the advertising level, it's the Googles and the Facebooks who understand your footprint in social media, on search, and say, okay, this person has done this, therefore this ad is relevant. Within the walls of the company, say for e-commerce, there's a huge amount of clickstream. My clients have 4 billion sessions in a year on their websites, and that is a lot of data that clearly indicate what each of the customers is looking for.
And their interests.
And their interests. Yeah. And this is not just demographic data, this is much more immediate. Mm-hmm. Being able to harness that data and utilize a customer 360 database, as well as some AI, rather than hard-coding marketing rules, to appropriately message, service, provide informative content, provide an offer at the right point is what is going to win. And this is the new regime of customer service.
So it's basically we're going into laser-focused customer service.
Correct. I think the words being bandied around are not just segment-based marketing, but one-to-one marketing.
One-to-one marketing.
Yes.
That's what I've heard too. Fantastic. So I wanted to wrap up our session with bringing up the key points of our discussion. So we did talk about digital transformation, what it is about. There were signs, we talked about the science of of the need in the digital transformation, and about the roles of executives and board members, and how to come around and help our organization to grow through accepting or adopting the digital transformation technologies. Do you have any advice for our members in terms of going forward with digital transformation? The reason I'm asking for this last question is because we talked about benefits, we talked about risks, and sometimes when the information is very new and novel, the risks outweigh the benefits, and it's getting more difficult to make the decision going forward.
Yes.
So what's your advice in this situation?
My advice is not going to mitigate the risks, unfortunately. I wish it could. But typically, leadership, particularly the board, needs to be able to do 4 things regularly. One, making sure that they're educated about new technologies and their impact and what their competitors are doing is super important. So this is an ongoing thing. I would advocate creation of some sort of an education technology council, either at the C-level or particularly the board level, to make sure that everybody's aware of what's going on and what needs to be done. The second thing is to very carefully evolve strategy and to be nimble with that strategy in some sense. So the board as well as the C-suite needs to participate in strategic talks to be sure that they're taking advantage of the opportunities and avoiding the risks that come with all of this technology burgeoning around us. The third piece is probably very tactical, making the plans, sticking to timelines, making sure that these plans are not overturned for whatever reason because executives are coming in.
Priorities, yeah.
Correct. This is probably more on the C-level rather than the board side, but it needs to be done somewhat regularly. The last piece, and this is probably the most important thing, is that culture has to change. The culture has to be one of entrepreneurship and risk-taking, because it is truly important that the people that are charged with making this transformation feel safe and don't feel like their jobs are at stake. So if you do not provide that culture to them, they will do nothing, or they will leave and go to a different company. So these are the 4 things that I think are super
Fantastic advice from a wise man. So we talked about education, strategy, planning, and actually culture, which is a big one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pradeep. It was a very informative discussion, and I hope it was useful for our TBC Talks members.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.